In this episode, I talk about double-ended fountain pens, how long your tipping material should last, and how I do work-life balance. Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it's episode number 137 of Goulet Q&A. I am back flying solo again this week. Drew joined me last week. It was a lot of fun. Hope you all enjoyed it. Got a lot of good feedback, good comments on that. You know, got a little bit of concern because some people were like, I don't want you to get a little too bantery, try to stick to the pen stuff. And I was like, okay, that's fine. It was a special kind of a guest spot for Drew. I might have him on again in the future. I don't know. We just kind of winged it last week and had him on there, so I'm sure we'll have him on again. But he's great. Good guy, knowledgeable guy about pens, but I am back to going solo again this week. Yeah, it's a pretty good week, a little bit short. We had Labor Day on Monday, so you know, trying to catch up from a 3-day weekend here, which, you know, our website's open 7 days a week. But when we only have a 4-day week like this, it's a lot to catch up from. So our team is pretty busy this week. Had some cool stuff come in too in the last week or so. So we had the Pelican M205 Aquamarines that came in. That was really good, been pretty successful. A lot of people enjoying those. And then we have had Nemesign, which has been a pretty decent pen brand. I talked to you all about this last week, and I think it's doing pretty well. So excited to see once you all actually get them all and then get feedback on them. It's been pretty well received so far though, so I'm pretty happy about that. Also, we've had a new product, the Pelican, sorry, not Pelican, don't know why I said that, Noodler's 308 refillable cartridge, which is an interesting product here. So this is a essentially a sort of a traveling refillable cartridge of sorts that actually fits onto a Noodler's Ahab or one of the newer Noodler's Neponsets. The Neponsets that have the white collar on them, it'll fit on those. So essentially what comes on these pens, I'll pull out an Ahab here as a demonstrator so I can show you what's going on. So it has a piston style converter, a slide piston converter. And you can remove it and turn it into an eyedropper. That's been pretty commonly done, which gives it a huge ink capacity, but then has a tendency to burp sometimes. Anything with this large of an ink capacity, it's gonna have a tendency to burp. So in order to cut down on that and also to add to the versatility of the pen, I guess, Noodler's developed these cartridges that have a sealable cap on them. So you can actually fill this with ink, carry it around with you, and then you can install it onto your pen with or without the ink feeder, and it then fits into the body of your pen like this, and you can write with it. It helps with the burping because it's a little less ink capacity than the whole body here, and also there's kind of a layer of insulation there to keep it from, you know, having direct contact with your hand. And it's a little bit bigger ink capacity than just the converter is here, because this is about 2 mils in the converter, maybe a little less, and you get just under 3 mils with this cartridge. So we are selling them in a 5-pack. They work out to be $1 a piece, so they're pretty reasonably priced. We had to put them in a 5-pack just because that was the only economical way for us to kind of pack them up and sell them like that. So I know 5 is kind of on the upper limit of what you would possibly need, but that's what they are. So they're clear. They have some different colored caps, but it's not like you know, distinctly different. So they're kind of like a marbled color, but they do screw onto the back as well, which I found you can fit into the Ahab pretty well if it's screwed onto the back. It doesn't aesthetically necessarily help that much. I guess it helps keep it kind of secure in the pen, but it's pretty secure because it's screwed on there anyway. I did find that if you are going to be putting it into the Neponset, you want to remove this thing, because when I installed it in mine, it actually, when I went to remove it out of the pen, this stayed back up in the back of the pen. So that wasn't necessarily ideal. I then had to do a little MacGyvering to get the thing out of there, but essentially what I had to do was take 2 of these and tape them together and then unscrew it into it and pull it out. It was somewhat dramatic for a good 30 seconds or so, but that is them. They are pretty interesting little products, and we have those for you Noodler's diehards out there who have your Ahabs or newer Neponsets. You can make them a little more versatile than even before. So since Noodler's doesn't sell cartridges in any of their ink form, I think this is an interesting product. So we have those, and what else have we got going on here? Let's see here. The Pilot Kakuno is going to be coming probably next week. They've been delayed just a little bit. And we have the Vanishing Point limited editions that are going to be coming sometime soon. I don't have an exact shipping date on them yet as of this point, but I'm expecting in the next couple of weeks to have an idea of when they're coming in. So you can check those out. Sign up for the email notification list on our site if you're interested in those. We're getting a pretty decent stock. I don't expect that they're going to like completely clear out like the Twilights did last year, but there's a pretty decent demand for them. So I think it'll be, you know, if you're interested in those, you may want to kind of move on it, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout in 2 days kind of situation like last year was. And then we're going to have the Aurora Optimas coming in the next couple of weeks as well. I don't have an exact date on those yet, but I know they are on the way. And then Lamy is going to have their new Lux and the 2000 Special Edition. Limited edition, not just special, but it's going to be limited. Those are going to be coming out towards the end of this month. They got pushed back. We were kind of told like maybe mid-month. Now it's looking towards the end of September here of 2016. So those are getting pushed out just a tiny bit, but we should be getting those in fairly decent quantity. So I'm expecting them to be pretty decent. So those are kind of exciting. Yeah, and that's kind of like what's up to date at the moment. I have some other, you know, smaller things that are going to be going on, but check out the coming soon and the new arrivals pages on our site if you want to get like the most up-to-date information on them. Let's go ahead and get into the questions for this week, shall we? So, pen and writing questions. This is from Triton N on Facebook. Do you know other brands than Edison who carry double-ended fountain pens? So this is interesting because I heard about this pen as Brian Gray was in the process of developing it. This was in 2013, so it's been a few years now. So Edison Pens is a custom pen company in Milan, Ohio. We sell their products. They have a production line of pens. So things like our Premier, like the Collier, these are pens that they make in a couple of different colors and then sell through retailers like me. But they also have a whole custom line called their Signature line that you can buy directly. And sometimes, Brian hasn't been doing this quite as much lately because he's been very busy, but even back in 2013, he had a little free time on his hand. He was developing, you know, things like this double-ended pen, and he would have some other, you know, kind of interesting products that he would develop, such as like the Beaumont pneumatic and some of these other interesting filling mechanisms and stuff. So essentially what he developed, and I don't have one to show you, I apologize, but what he developed was a fountain pen. It was a custom fountain pen that was eyedropper fill only, that had a nib on both ends, and it had two caps, basically. It was a pretty cool design. There's an FPN thread on it, and you can actually go and you can order this. He has it as a product listing on his custom side of his site now, so if you wanted to order one of these for yourself, you could. I get no kickback of any kind by throwing you over there, but I just think it's a cool product that you should check out. So it's a fountain pen on both ends, and fairly decent ink capacity, but not long enough to accommodate a cartridge or a converter or anything in order to get that double-ended feature on there. So it ends up being about 6 inches long. It's not too huge, but it's a pretty cool feature. So you can put two different nibs on it, have two different inks, etc. And essentially it was an idea from a customer of his, who then he kind of worked and did a few prototypes and ended up with this double-ended pen. So I heard about this, and that was the only double-ended fountain pen that I'd ever heard of before. And I was like, fountain pens have been around forever. I'm sure somebody had to develop these. I didn't spend like hours researching this, but I did do some Google searches and looked on FPN and some other places, and I could not find a double-ended fountain pen anywhere. So if there are some out there, I would love to know in the comments. If you know of any, I would love to, I'm not even trying to say like be proven wrong, because I would have to believe that somebody would have developed this at some point, but I can't think of a single brand that has done this. Now, what I have found from brands like Waterman and Wingsung and some others that I've found in my searches online are fountain pens that have a ballpoint or a pencil on the other end. That I found a few of those, but they're like vintage. I don't even know of any newer companies that are current companies that they're still doing that. This was more in like the days when fountain pens were much more ubiquitous. But today, I don't know if anybody's doing that. So it would take a custom pen maker like Brian Gray to be doing that, probably because the demand for it, I imagine, would not be incredibly high. But it is kind of a neat little thing. So as it is right now, I don't know of anybody else who does it, but you can check those out on Edison's site if you would like to learn more. Cool. All right, Hayden M on Facebook says, often when I buy vintage fountain pens, I notice the tipping material can be quite worn down from years of use. How long would you say tipping material should last on modern fountain pens that are used continuously? So this is a really good question. It's not unusual at all to have that. My mic cord is like all up on me here inside my shirt. So when it comes to tipping material, there's a lot of different factors that come into play, especially when you're talking about vintage pens. A lot of times they can't even date exactly how old they are. They can only give you maybe a range of 10 years or something like that, which is kind of a long time. If you think of a pen that's being used continuously for 10 years, that's a lot of wear and tear. Because paper is like, it's an abrasive. Even as smooth as it feels to your fingers, if you look like kind of microscopically at the paper, you see it's got like pits and valleys and all that kind of stuff. And it essentially acts like an abrasive that causes friction. So that's what happens, is it wears down over time. Even something as hard as the tip of a fountain pen nib. And actually the tipping on the fountain pen nib is some of the hardest material on earth that you can get. So if you notice on some pens, it'll say like iridium point and things like that. It's a little bit misleading. Iridium itself is arguably one of, if not the most dense metals on Earth. Essentially, it comes from meteors. So it's a fairly common material in meteorites, but it's incredibly rare on Earth. And they speculate that basically it's only coming from meteors that have crashed into the Earth like millions of years ago, that are providing the iridium ore that we have today. And they say like annually they're only mining about 3 tons of iridium ore, which is really not that much. It's quite rare. It's in the platinum group of metals. It's very, very dense. It's very corrosion and heat resistant as well. I think it can withstand like 2,000 degrees Celsius or something. So it's quite hard to work with. So the whole iridium point thing, it's not like your fountain pen tipping material is made of solid iridium, because that would just be unbelievably expensive. Even in their heyday, when fountain pens were made like all the time, it was only like I think I read 3.8% iridium, and the rest of it was other alloys and stuff like that, like ruthenium and tungsten and stuff like that. So a lot of this I get from a Wikipedia article too, which I have linked up on the blog if you're curious to read more about iridium and its use in various purposes. And even iridium today is used much more in like electronics and spark plugs and stuff like that like need that high corrosion resistance. And it's not quite as common today in fountain pen nibs. So there might be a small bit of it, but most of it is going to be some other material like tungsten or ruthenium, but I don't really know how much is in there. And depending on the different metals and alloys that could be in there, there's all kinds of different degrees of wear that can happen with these fountain pen tipping material. So that's kind of where I'm getting at with this whole thing, is that I couldn't really tell you from one brand to another, even one like pen model to another, especially if you talk about companies that are using fountain pen nibs that are made from, nib manufacturers and stuff like that. They may change their process over time, and it gets really, really tough. It's a little bit, I guess, a little bit more consistent sometimes when you have like a manufacturer such as Pilot or Lamy or Aurora that like makes their own nibs like soup to nuts. But that's not happening a lot of times with a lot of pen manufacturers these days. So the degree of wear that can happen can really vary a lot based on the actual like material makeup of the tipping material, as well as how much of that tipping material is actually on the page, or sorry, on the tip of the nib, which there's several factors there. It's the manufacturing process is involved there for sure, and then like the honing and grinding and tuning process from the individual manufacturer, but then also the actual tip size of the pen. If you have a broad nib or a double broad or something, you're gonna have a big wad of tipping material on there, as opposed to an extra fine, which is gonna be ground to a much finer point. So essentially, the finer the nib size you go, the faster it's going to wear, because there's just not as much material there on the end of that nib. So I'm trying to lace this with disclaimers of like, it can vary a lot. It can vary a bit depending on if somebody's writing on stone paper all the time versus like super smooth Clairefontaine, kind of stuff. That's going to have a huge degree of wear difference on the page, or on the tip. I keep saying the page, on the tipping material itself. You know, so if I'm looking at something like, you know, this Pilot Metropolitan, there's not like a massive amount of tipping material on here. So something like this used continuously would wear faster than, I don't know, let's see here, this Neponset's got a pretty decent wad of tipping material on it. You know, it's a music nib, very broad tip, so this would probably, just for no other reason other than the amount of material, it would last longer there. But all other factors equal, I think you could anticipate that a modern pen today with, you know, heavy use would probably last 5 to 10 years. And I'm talking heavy, I'm talking like you're going through several bottles of ink a year, you know, that much heavy use on a single pen. And there are people that use it that much. Most people probably don't use it quite that much. That would be what I'd consider to be heavy use. For those that are more casual users, just kind of out and about doing your daily writing and stuff, it's going to last you a really long time, like decades, probably a single pen. And if you have multiple pens that you're kind of using in rotation and stuff like that, you're essentially not going to wear your pen significantly enough to really even sweat it. And then if you're a very casual user of a particular pen, so you have a collection of, you know, 30, 50, 100 pens or more, and you're cycling them out all the time, you're essentially not going to cause any noticeable wear on your pens, assuming it's got that tipping material on there. Now, there are some nibs, such as some of the stainless steel, like italic or stub nibs, like the Lamy 1.1 here. It's not uncommon to have untipped stainless steel nibs in stub form. Those might wear a little bit faster because it doesn't have that harder tipping material. You know, it's got stainless steel, which is still pretty hard wearing. You might see those wear out a little bit faster. But even still, I've been in this business for 7 years now, and I haven't had anybody that's been like, oh my gosh, my Lamy nib is worn down to the point where I can't use it anymore. I really haven't heard of that at all. The only time I hear about like noticeable wear on a pen is vintage pens that people are picking up at shows and stuff like that. The only other issue that I've ever had was a couple of the OMOS stub nibs that they had. Were untipped. They were gold nibs, but untipped. Now, gold is a much softer material than stainless steel. That I could see, and I kind of raised some concern about that at the time we were carrying it, and they were like, oh, we've never had a problem with it. And then I got a couple of pens back that had issues, and I was like, oh gosh, okay, so this is really not ideal. And then almost went out of business, so go figure. I'm not saying that was a direct correlation, but it just happened to be the timing of it, and so I never really got like any good resolution over that whole issue. But generally speaking, from talking to other nibmeisters and stuff like that, untipped gold nibs are generally not a great idea because the metal is just too soft. That you can wear through in a matter of months or a year to the point where it would cause trouble. But stainless steel is pretty hard wearing. The tipping that's on stainless steel and gold nibs, that whatever alloy that they put on there, is pretty tough. And it would take quite a bit of wear to get it to be very noticeable. And if that does happen, you know, you can get it reshaped. If it's not completely like worn down, you can get it reshaped by a knowledgeable nibmeister. And if it's a pen that's worth really trying to, you know, salvage, you know, if it's worth investing, I'm trying to think of exactly how much it costs to retip a nib. It's not a super commonly available service today because it does take some practice and some know-how to be able to do it. But I think you could expect to pay somewhere in the $75 to maybe $100 range, depending on the complexity and what you're trying to do. I would expect you might want to pay that. So it'd only be a pen if it's really worth that. You wouldn't do that with a Lamy nib, you know, but certain nibs are, you know, replaceable, such as Lamy and so on. So those are pretty good, but beyond that, I think you're in pretty good shape. Unless you are a very, very heavy user of an individual pen, then you may want to consider like, what is my strategy for if I actually wear through this nib. But honestly, for the years that I've been involved in this so far, I've not had anybody really come back. I can't think of anyone that's come back and said, that pen that I bought from you a while ago, I've completely worn it out now. I just haven't had that happen. So not that it can't, but it's not something that I think you need to be like super, super worried about. It's more like decades down the road. All right, this question is from iSun the Mermaid on Instagram. I've found that when I ink up all my pens at the same time, my Ahabs and Creapers will completely dry out, while my vintage Sheaffer no-nonsense pens used as eyedroppers stay perfectly good to go for much longer. In fact, I've not had one dry out on me yet. I would chalk it up to Noodler's pens being demonstrators, but not all of them are. Do you have any insight on this matter? I don't think it really has anything to do with the fact that it's a demonstrator. I've never heard of that really being an issue or witnessed that for myself. So I don't think that's really your issue. Really, the issue that you have going on is the design of the pen itself. So I don't know a lot about Sheaffer no nonsenses, did a little research. You know, they're like school grade pens, they're fairly inexpensive pens, but the reviews that I see from people that are loyal to them, they don't make them anymore, and they have them for a while, but for the people that use them, they love them because they are frankly no nonsense pens. They're just kind of made to work. They're pretty minimalistic, pretty basic in design, and they just function really well. Their design is school pens, you know, as kid pens. So they were made to just kind of work. The Noodler's pens are flexible nibs, which immediately makes them a little more finicky, I will say. And the design of these pens, it has an ebonite feed, and it's made to be a very high ink delivery system. So the ink flow on this pen is very, very wet, much wetter than your Sheaffer. So partly that's the issue, and partly it has to do with the seal on the cap. You know, it's not a completely sealed cap, especially on the Creeper. You know, and that pen has a pretty small ink capacity in the grand scheme of things, so it's not uncommon to have that pen dry out kind of fast. The Ahabs are not quite as bad, but it still happens. And especially if you have a very dry climate, or it's very hot outside, or if you leave it in the direct sunlight, maybe that's where a demonstrator could actually impact it, is if you leave it in direct sunlight, the heat from it, I don't know if it has to do with the demonstrator, just having it in the heat will cause the water to evaporate out of the pen quicker. So that's essentially what's happening when your ink is drying out in your pen, is your water inside the ink, which ink is mostly made of water, is evaporating out of there, and you're left behind with the dyes and the other components of the ink that are in there, and then it just won't flow as well. Now, if it completely dries out, you can wet it and clean it out and reconstitute that and clean it all out, no problem. But for these pens, I find that you do need to be a little more diligent about inking them up and using them regularly. They don't tend to last as long without drying out. So, you know, there's a couple of things you can do to kind of help with that. One of them is to keep it in a sealed container of some kind, you know, like a little Ziploc bag. Maybe not this one because it's too small, but something with that idea, a resealable bag, so that basically it doesn't have as much of a tendency to evaporate out of there. It's kind of like, you know, containing the humidity in the pen. And another thing you can do, especially if there's a pen that has, you know, a decent amount of space in the top here, you could definitely do it with the Ahab. You can, I think you can fit it with the nib creeper too. You can cut up a small piece of sponge and kind of stick it down in the cap and wet it, and it acts like a little humidor inside your cap. So maybe on the demonstrator version it wouldn't look so pretty, you might not want to go for it, but it's something that I've tried before, and it actually works to a pretty decent degree. Now, that may be more trouble than it's worth for you, but it is something that you could experiment with. The only challenge that you don't want to do necessarily is have the piece of sponge so big that the tip of the fountain pen actually touches the sponge when the pen is capped, because then it will like wick the ink out of the top of it, which, you know, not necessarily ideal, but that would also help to keep it fairly flowing, I guess. But that's what's going on. So I don't think it's necessarily like your pen versus the Ahab versus the no nonsense kind of thing. It's more of a, you know, like a flex pen like this with a really open feed versus a more conventional fountain pen, especially that one. You know, and I see this not just with the Ahab and the Creeper, but it's really the Neponset, the Conrad. It's really all these Noodler's pens that have these wide open feeds that are made to deliver a ton of ink. It also leaves it kind of wide open for drying out. So that is what I've got on that today. I got an ink question today. This is from Judeman Art on Instagram. It says, my Parker Quink black bottle is all mostly empty, and I've already used some of my new Lamy black. Can I simply pour the ink from the Quink into the new Lamy bottle, or will mixing them have more dire consequences than expected? Well, this is an interesting question, and I'm going to leave you in suspense for a couple of seconds while I take a sip of water. Ooh, I've got iced tea in there. Forgot I put that in there this morning. Well, you can do that, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Whenever you're mixing ink, you know, I've talked about ink mixing in Q&A before. Whenever you're mixing ink, especially across brands like this, and especially across properties, because the Quink you've got, the black is a permanent ink. It's not like super permanent black, but it's not conventional ink. Whenever you're mixing that, especially with another brand, another type of ink, you always want to be careful about doing that. So it sounds like the nature of your question is kind of like maybe not even just specifically about these inks, but like in general, when I finish one bottle, can I just kind of pour it into the next, especially if it's the same color? Yeah, maybe you could, but you also might get some kind of reaction, and you wouldn't want to take and pour your ink into your new bottle of ink, have some kind of weird reaction, have it gel or foam up or do something crazy, and then you've just ruined your new bottle of ink just to try to save a few drips of the old one. So that's part of it. Another part of the reason maybe not as crazy to go for it is, after you've used up a bottle of ink, when every time that you're using the ink, you're taking your fountain pen that you have been using on your paper. It's picking up paper fibers, it's attracting dust through the friction that is caused on your writing, and it kind of cakes up stuff inside your pen. Well, if you're not cleaning your pen out regularly and you're just refilling it back into your vial or into your bottle, it can, throughout the life of that bottle, get some like sediment and some kind of nastiness that has been picked up from your pen left over in the bottle of the ink. So you might have a few drips left in there that you want to save into your new bottle, but then you're taking basically all the gunk that you've been saving up through the fillings of your pen, and you're dumping it right into your brand new ink. So that's really up to you. Some people do that practice all the time and they're totally cool with it. It's like whatever, it's kind of like some people prefer to clean their grill in between when they do their grilling their food. Other people never clean it, and they say that the char on it like adds to the flavor and all that kind of stuff. And it's really just kind of two different camps. That's kind of, maybe not to that degree, but that's a little bit of what we got going on here. Is it's kind of like, a different just way of doing things, whether you want to really start fresh and have a whole new ink, or whether you just want to take what you already had and just kind of dump and continue. You can really go about it whatever you want. That's more commonly done when you're reusing the exact same color and you're just taking, your Parker Quink, and you have a new Parker Quink bottle, you just kind of dump it in there and you keep on going. You can totally do that. But really the bigger issue here is the fact that you're mixing across brands and across properties. So if you really want to do that, I would experiment. I would get a couple of small ink sample vials. Like I should have like 100 of them here, but an ink sample vial like this. You can mix a small amount of it, and you can set it aside, and you can see if you get kind of any reaction. You can ink it up into a pen that is easy to clean out, and try it out and make sure that it works properly like you think it should. And then you can go ahead and mix it. For something like you're asking about here, that's probably more trouble than it's worth. I imagine the nature of why you're asking this is it's kind of convenient. Can I just dump and go? So I wouldn't recommend doing that personally. Just taking into whatever ink you're finishing up with and dumping it into the next one that you have. I don't think that's necessarily a great practice. You can totally do it if you want to. It's your prerogative, but I think you take the risk of getting some kind of mixture, and I know that pretty much any ink company would recommend against doing that. What I would recommend instead, if you want to get the most out of it, is to find a way to really get the last drops out of your Quink. Something like an ink syringe or whatever can help to really draw up the last out of it and fill your pen. And then you don't have to worry about mixing inks and stuff. You can clean it out and then start with a new clean pen and a new clean bottle of ink and go about your business. That's the way that I would personally like to approach it. I think that was it. Cool. Let's see here. I have a troubleshooting question this week. I got like one out of every group this week. Okay, so I got a troubleshooting question. This is from halfapx on Instagram. halfapx on Instagram. The TWSBI pistons are driving me crazy. I've seen the disassembly video you posted, but it took me almost 30 minutes to put it back together. Raise your hand if that's happened to you, right? Like I know the reason I took this question is because I know you're not alone here. My eco is lovely, but I'm dreading the ink changes. Also, since I put my piston back together, it has a slight gap at the top between the knob and the pen body. Even though I'm certain I cannot screw it in there any further, the sound it makes whenever I try make me feel like I'm about to crack it. And forgive me for just a second, I'm gonna jump off screen and grab the pen because I forgot to get that beforehand, even though I try to prepare for these things as much as I can. So let me grab my eco for you. And I have a TWSBI eco wrench here. So, okay, what you're talking about here is you have a gap between the filler knob and your pen body, which means that your piston is not set properly in here. I hate to tell you that, but you're gonna have to take it apart and do it again. And I'm gonna show you right now. I'm gonna do my best, recorded live here. I'm gonna do my best to try to intentionally mimic exactly what you have going on. So this piston rod unscrews out of here, and if you have it set too far back, let me try setting it back a little bit, and then I go in here. Okay, so what's happening now is I threaded it with the piston knob a little bit too far out. So when I go to reassemble it, if I nail this, I'm gonna make you mad because you're gonna try this like 10 times and get frustrated. Okay, so as I'm doing it that way, oh, look at that. I didn't do it wrong enough. See, now I'm intentionally trying to screw it up and I'm having difficulty. How do you like that? I'll get it, promise you. So I'm going to unscrew it just a little bit more, get it in place here. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is get it so that the piston actually is seated too far up into the mechanism so that my knob is actually not going to make contact with the body of the pen before it connects. There we go. So what I have going on now here, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what I have going on. Okay. So what I have just done is I have taken this and I've seated it too far up into the mechanism. So what's happening is as I'm twisting it, this piston is hitting the back of the mechanism here, and my knob has not made contact with the body. So it's loose on here. You can see that. It's not tightening up onto the body. And what you're talking about doing is you're trying to tighten it from here, and it sounds like it's going to crack it because you're going to be stripping those threads inside the mechanism. You don't want to do that. That is, it's improperly seated in there. So the way to fix that, which I'm going to show you right now, is to unscrew it. Okay. Leave the mechanism intact. And what you want to do is you'll want to unscrew it, pull it out, and then just give it like maybe a half rotation or so, and then set it back in there. You'll give a half rotation clockwise, okay? And then you'll try seating it back in there. I know this is like riveting for all of you who don't care about this question. Go ahead and skip if you're done with that, because this is going to be the extent of the whole answer. Okay, let's see. Did Brian do it here? So now, boom. See, I went too far, right? So what I did was I seated it not as far. So I turned the knob clockwise so that the mechanism was more compact, and then this is now not seated all the way up in there. So my ink capacity is lower. It still function. Now it's tightening back up on there, but I kind of went too far with it the other way. So even me and my genius self, with all my vast experience doing this, I still have to do it a couple of times to get it to really seat in there. Now, once it's too far out, it's pretty easy because all I do is unscrew it and I hold my finger on the end here, and I kind of like put a little bit of pressure on here and it just clicks in place, and that's just going to reset it to be a little bit deeper down in there. And I think now this is going to be in a pretty decent spot. We'll see if it gets it exactly, and I won't bore you too much by doing this, but boom. So that's it. I got it. So now it's in place, it's tight. There is going to be a little bit of a space here. That's normal. So probably you were trying to get rid of this space, but this is about the appropriate amount of space. You should see about one full thread on that piston rod. And if you look at the pictures on gouletpens.com, on the product pages, you can see there's about this much of a gap here. If you try to get it seated up any closer than that, that's when you're not going to be able to seat your knob all the way down, and it's going to be a problem for you. So there you go. Voila. That's your magic. That's how you do it. Believe me, I hear this all the time about people that are trying to adjust their TWSBIs and take their pistons out. If it's that much trouble, once you finally get it in the right place, just don't ever take it apart again. I'm a tinkerer. I love to take things apart. So for me, I don't mind doing it because I've put in that time. of screwing it up and doing those half-hour sessions, and I love doing that. So now when I do it, if I mess it up, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what I need to do, and I kind of mess around. I get it back in place in a matter of minutes, but I can understand why that would be frustrating. Some people are just not as mechanically inclined, and so it's more of a hassle. And I literally get some customers that every time they take the pen apart, it's an hour or more for them to try to get it back together. They're watching my videos and they're getting super frustrated. I've literally had it to the point where somebody's been so frustrated they've actually mailed the pen back to me, had me fix it or somebody on my team fix it, and then mail it back to them, and then they never touch it again. So hopefully it's not to that extreme for you, but that's what you have going on. It's not seated properly. You got to rethread it in there and do it. I hate to tell you, but that's how you do it. All right. This is a business question from Sam F. Sam, you are a loyal commenter here on Facebook. So Sam says, kind of a dumb question, but I've noticed that my last couple of orders haven't been wrapped in the signature blue shrink wrap. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the packing, don't get me wrong. Everything was snug and secure, as it always is, and everything arrived in perfect condition. It just made me idly curious. Are you guys ditching the blue shrink wrap? Say it ain't so. No, Sam, I'm not. And the reason I took this question, even though it's it's a bit of an incidental question, is because I've had other people that have said the same thing. So recently, in the last few weeks, we've actually been experimenting a little bit with some of our packing methods. Now, obviously, we take our packing incredibly seriously, but we also believe in constantly improving, right? So we're trying some different methods, trying some new packing materials as well. So part of what we're trying to do is use this new bubble wrap that we have, that we actually looked into several years ago, but we weren't quite at the scale where it economically made sense for us to switch over to this stuff. But I think now we're doing such volume where it starts to make sense. But we're investigating this specific type of bubble wrap that allows us to pack things a little bit differently. It's slightly wider than we've had before, so it encapsulates things a little differently. So in like certain types of smaller packages, we were able to experiment with, maybe in certain scenarios where it doesn't need to be specifically like shrink wrap protected, and it's certain products like, a Noodler's pen, that doesn't necessarily need to be wrapped up for its own sake. Stretch wrap isn't necessarily helping in anything, whereas if we have like multiple bottles of ink, we'll still wrap that up. But we're experimenting a little bit with maybe not doing the stretch wrap in certain scenarios. We are definitely still doing the blue stretch wrap. We're not planning on getting rid of that anytime soon. But I know there was a while there where it was like, we're going to stretch wrap everything because of part of our branding and all this kind of stuff, which is true. But we've equally had a lot of people who have been a little more eco-conscious and stuff like that, and like, you guys are wasting so much stretch wrap and all that kind of stuff. And so that's always a fine balance for us to play, but I think we're using it where it's really necessary, and we're always open to feedback about when it's working and when it's not. And actually, one of the best ways that we get that is when you place your order and you get that little packer card that has the signature of the person that actually packed your order. There's a web address on there for you to leave us feedback about it. And if there is something like that, we actually read that feedback. We don't have the time to respond to everybody for that feedback, but we actually do read that feedback. So if there is something like, hey, my product arrived okay, but I did not like the presentation as much, that kind of stuff really helps for us to know. So also you can leave comments here on the Q&A. Obviously, I'd love to get your feedback. But that's really the bottom line of what's going on. And specifically to that bubble wrap that we're investigating. It's looking like we're probably going to end up making that transition because it's looking like it's going to work. We're just doing some kind of final testing. But this new bubble wrap that we're looking into, it is made of 15% recycled material, and it also is completely recyclable. So it's much more eco-friendly. Hello. It's much more eco-friendly. I forgot to silence my computer. It's much more eco-friendly than the stuff that we have used previously. The stuff we used previously was recyclable, but it was like number 7 or something like that plastic, and that's not available in all localities. But this new stuff is like number 2 or something like that. I don't know the exact number of it, but it's much more universally recyclable. So that's pretty exciting. And then it's actually made of recycled material too, so that's pretty cool. But if you happen to get any of that stuff from us in your packaging, it's the bubble wrap wrap that's not like individual bubbles. You know, it's like more of a row of bubbles, and it's just manufactured differently. It's a different type of plastic that's used and something that we're experimenting with. The dimensions are slightly different, so it's something that we're experimenting to make sure, like, you know, our folks who are packing stuff up, our fulfillment team, you know, we want to make sure that they're like on board with it, because it's really up to them. They are the ones who are responsible for how everything's packed, and they all seem to be pretty on board with it. So we'll probably be making that changeover, you know, pretty soon here. But I think that's part of why you're seeing a little bit of some of the experimentation. And we've done experiments in the past, and a couple of years ago when, you know, we tested out some like crinkled paper machines and some of this other kind of stuff that just wasn't quite as good. We tried some like green biodegradable bubble wrap stuff that was kind of cool, but it was like twice the price. Or more, I think, and we were having a real problem getting ones that were like halfway deflated, like they weren't filled all the way, and so we had to use a lot more material, and it was like a lot of waste, and the cost was way more expensive, and it ended up not working for us. So you know, this is kind of exciting because this is the first like innovation we've really been able to do in our packing process in a little while. So that's kind of exciting. We're always looking forward to that kind of stuff. So, but no, we're not looking to get rid of the blue stretch wrap, but we are always looking to innovate and be, you know, conscious about the amount of material that we're using. So that's a lot of the reason for the cutback in certain scenarios there. All right, and then the last question I have, this is a personal one. I know this is like a really short Q&A here in the grand scheme of things, which I have. I'm trying to look at how long I've been going here. Pretty decent amount of time. How long is that timing? Let's see here. 41 minutes. Okay, I freaked out for a second there because of where the books were in the background. I have a timestamp on my camera here. It's 41 minutes, but I couldn't see the 1. I was like, has this only been recording for 4 minutes? How is that possible? We're good. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit shorter Q&A. But the last question I have today, this is from drstrout on Instagram. How do you balance your personal life and work life when they seem so intertwined? Honest to goodness, I feel like I may have addressed this before. And forgive me if I did. It may have even been recently. I don't know. I looked through the last couple of Q&As. I couldn't find it. So forgive me if I've answered the whole work-life balance thing before, but I'm going to answer it a little bit differently here with some new stuff that I haven't talked about before. So even if I'll be honest with you guys, these Q&As are getting to the point where I've answered 1,700 questions or something like that. I've lost count, and there's so many I can't even keep track of what I've answered, what I haven't at this point. But either way, I'll try to add value and give you a little bit different spin than I've done it before. So work-life balance. So that's, you know, a buzzword term that came about, you know, many years ago. And actually a lot of the old like work-life balance has even kind of been replaced by the term work-life integration, because the whole concept of balance is like you have to give up one in order to do the other, which is, you know, to a degree, yes, I can understand where that concept comes from, because like you have your work life and then you have your basically not work life. It's a very like, you know, seesaw kind of approach, and the idea is, you know, you're not working too much, you're working just enough, that kind of thing. But to me, I don't like that metaphor quite as much, just because it makes it sound like work is in contradiction to your like actual life, and that's definitely not how I operate in this business, and not the reason I started this company, and not the way that Rachel and I approach our marriage, our family, this business, or any of that stuff. So I do think it's important to keep things in balance in general in your life, but I don't think it's always necessarily like a work versus non-work type of thing. I think it is possible to get a lot of personal fulfillment through your work. And so, you know, it is definitely an interesting balance that we have to take, specifically Rachel and I, because we're a married couple. We founded this company together. We both still work in it full-time plus, and we have 2 young children who are just at a very like, you know, time intensive, you know, intentional time in their life. Anyone who has, you know, like preschool or young elementary age kids, they demand a lot of attention. They require a lot of coaching and mentoring and nurturing, and like even like getting ready in the morning is a lot of, okay, let's go down our list. We have to remind them like 8 times every single item on their list that they have to do to get ready for the day. Yes, obviously like children are are demanding in a lot of different ways at every age, but I'm finding that this age in particular can be rather time consuming in some ways. So it is demanding a lot. Rachel and I, when we finish a day at work, our kids, our son's in first grade now, our daughter's in preschool. So we finish work, they finish school, and then we have family time together and things like that. We stay pretty intently focused on family time, do the whole like bedtime routine, reading them stories, all that, and praying together, all that kind of stuff. And then once they're in bed, that's kind of like us time. We focus on our marriage. And then usually we're better about not working like every single night, but depending on how much is going on, we may work another couple hours at night before we go to bed. But it's interesting because everybody has a different sense of what balance means. Some people would say like, you have to work at night, like that is unbalanced. And it's like, well, not necessarily. We have goals and we have ambitions, and we want to further our business, and we have the ability to do that by working a little bit extra at night, and that's something that we enjoy doing together. And it looks a little bit differently for us than for most. So Rachel and I, when we feel really balanced, we're putting in 50 to 55, maybe 60 hours a week. Like that actually that's not too unbalanced for us. If it starts getting more than 60, or if it's more than 60 on like a regular basis, several weeks in a row, that can start to be a bit much, because we do have, a lot of family activities and things like that we like to be involved in. But at the same time, I think that our sense of balance is a little more work heavy than most. And that's just kind of the way that we approach it. We feel okay with that. But I have an interesting kind of thing I want to share with you, basically because it's not all about like work and non-work, right? So there is something that I've actually shared this with my team in one of our company meetings the other week that I want to share with you today. Some of you may have heard of Zig Ziglar before. He is he's no longer with us in this earth, but he is a motivational speaker that popularized this concept called the Wheel of Life. So there are 7 different spokes to this Wheel of Life, and it's got all of these different categories. And his whole concept of the Wheel of Life is that as your wheel is spinning, you want to have everything to be even, because if your wheel is flat on one part, it's going to cause a lot of noise, a lot of friction in your life. So you want to make sure that you keep everything at a pretty balanced level. Now that looks differently for everyone. You need to determine that for yourself. But if you rate your own degree of, basically how satisfied you are with each of your spokes of your wheel, it can be just kind of a helpful, somewhat subjective, but maybe slightly objective tool to help you take something that's relatively ambiguous and make it a little more specific and meaningful. So the different areas that he points out are family, spiritual, which could mean a lot of different things to you, career, financial, health, which could be physical or mental health, intellectual, and social. Now, social for somebody like me and Rachel, we are quite social here at work with our team, but we're not very social in our personal lives. So getting together with our friend of, the parents of one of Joseph's friends once every couple of weeks, we're pretty good there, and like being involved in our church choir. Like that's pretty much all the social we really need. And then involvement with our family. Family is really important. So like our social looks very different, where somebody's really extroverted, going out several times a week and networking and doing all these social events, that to them feels more balanced. So you have to really define what it looks like for you. And this is something that I kind of do continually to keep myself in check, as I kind of think about each of these areas. So the idea of life balance to me is not so much of a scale with 2 things on it, but I like the whole wheel idea a bit more, because if I'm feeling a little bit out of balance, if you will, usually I can assign it to maybe 1 or 2 of these things, and I realize like, okay, my career part is taking a little bit more, and I'm sacrificing maybe on my spiritual or my health or something like that. Maybe I should not work that extra hour, but I should maybe ride my bike instead, or I should do something like that. It can just kind of help. And then I have a nice little quote at the bottom here from Zig: "What you get by achieving your goals is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals," which I really like. So yeah, I'm all about self-improvements. This is a nice little tool to maybe help you out. I'll do this kind of stuff for my team, you know, because I read a ton. I'll stumble across, you know, tools like this that can be helpful, kind of just, you know, personal growth and satisfaction and stuff like that. But I don't know, that's kind of where I come from. So it's something I do think about a lot. And I think the fact that I am intentional about it and I think about it and I am kind of always on the watch for it helps me to stay a little bit more in balance than maybe if I didn't think about it as much. Then essentially this business, and anyone who's self-employed knows that your business will take as much out of you as you give it. The work will always be there tomorrow, and you have to really kind of decide what's your priority and when to stop working and focus on other areas of your wheel. Okay, that's all I got for this week. My question of the week this week, I was thinking about getting into this kind of stuff, but I was like, nah, I'm not gonna get that deep on the question of the week this week. Let's go back to talking about the fountain pen tipping material, because if we're talking about using fountain pens for a long period of time to the point where you might actually wear away the tipping material, it's kind of an interesting concept. So I'm curious to know from you, what one fountain pen, you know, nib size and all, have you actually used more than any other, to the point where you actually might start to think about, would I wear away the tip of this nib? Just what's your end-all be-all go-to fountain pen that you think you're going to end up using for decades? I'm very curious what that is. So that's all I got for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out gouletpens.com for some of the products I talked about here. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our Facebook. We just hit 20,000 fans on Facebook, which I think is pretty awesome. We're about to hit 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is going to be kind of crazy. So we might try to do something fun for that. We're still in the planning stages and maybe seeing if we can do something there. But that is all that I've got. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a wonderful weekend, a great rest of your week, and right on.